Hello, community, and welcome back for the last installment of this particular conversation. I'm Dr. Anita, the founder and CEO of Dr. Anita Enterprises, where I help leaders and teams navigate complexity and change by raising awareness about how diversity, inclusion, and belonging reinforces workforce sustainability. We have been enjoying all month long a conversation with Leo Bottary. He is the founder and CEO of Peer Innovation, which is a peer advisory group specifically focused on the unique experience of the C-suite. Leo, I can't tell you how much I have enjoyed our conversation, how much I've learned, and how much of my own work has been reinforced just through our conversation. Have you been enjoying our conversations?
Very much. Not only the conversations we've had, on air, if you will, but the wonderful conversation we had off air that really, I think, set the tone for what we've been doing here over the last month. So it's been wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. So the last area that I'd like to focus on today are the questions that you like to ask of CEOs that you work with in Peer Innovation. And those three questions are asking how CEOs like to learn, how they grow, and how they bring new thinking into their companies. And again, let's keep it real. For some CEOs, bringing diversity, inclusion, and belonging conversations is new thinking that they're bringing to their companies. So where would you like to start with those three questions?
So much of this is getting people to come into a situation when we think about being among our peers, right? There's a certain vulnerability around that. And in an environment where that person is the king or queen of their company, where they're oftentimes not questioned a whole lot, and they just have that positional power and all that. Well, now you step into a room with a bunch of CEOs and that positional power goes away.
Yes.
What comes into play, however, is this idea that you share the common challenge of having a role in your company where you don't get to look at things only from a marketing, sales, finance, legal, HR perspective. You've got to look at the whole shooting match with all of those stakeholders and all of that. So now they're in a room with other people who, by the way, will typically represent very different industries. So now I become acquainted with practices, for example, that are commonplace in someone else's industry, unheard of in mine. And I'm thinking, that could work in my company and may even serve as a competitive differentiator.
Yes.
But that's still not an easy step a lot of times for CEOs to make. In fact, what's really interesting is most people are surprised when they join a quote business CEO group, and that whether that's people participating in YPO forums, Renaissance Executive forums, Vistage, EO, whatever it happens to be. They come together oftentimes believing that they're discussing business stuff. And all too often, a lot of it's personal. And it's personal for several reasons. One is because there are things just going on in our lives that can impact how we show up at work, and they will find their way, into the conversation, certainly. But it's also interesting that when you ask so many people who participate in these groups, if they are more comfortable actually sharing business issues or personal issues, believe it or not, they have much more difficulty on average, this isn't everyone, sharing business issues than personal issues. And it's really funny because people are really surprised to hear that.
I was going to say, can you repeat that? Which one are they more hesitant to discuss?
They're more hesitant to discuss business issues.
Really?
Yes. And think about why. And it's because it's a risk of compromising their currency among the other CEOs, that they either don't know something or they screwed up something or something of that nature. And they're going to be judged in that way. There's that vulnerability there. Now, of course, part of what you're trying to do in the whole environment is create an environment where there isn't judgment and aren't kind of assumptions. But that takes time, and that takes people recognizing that, people are we're all different in that regard. Some of us will tell our life story to anyone who will listen. Right. Other people are just they just keep things close to the vest. They're just a little more private. There's nothing wrong with that. But, getting people to kind of play and I think exhibit what I always talk about in terms of being both an act of courage and generosity, to really share your story, to talk about, what's going on with you, because not only will it benefit you and the person telling the story, but it benefits everyone else in the room. And those kinds of things are very powerful. So I think what people start to recognize is that even though their natural tendency, when you ask them, hey, how do I learn and grow and bring new thinking into my company, they go to the simple things. I read books and attend conferences and events and coaches and consultants and all that. But for those who I think have become acquainted with the idea of sitting around with their peers who, again, share the common challenge, B, a shared understanding about what it takes to be a really great contributor to the group, which means being a good listener, being curious, not dominating the conversation, things like that. Just nice ground rules that get everyone working and playing together nicely, if you will, but in a challenging, good, purposeful way. That unlocks a whole new level of opportunity, and especially, by the way, where they're working on real issues going on with them in their organizations in real time. It's not like they're doing case studies that happened 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and analyzing them. This is all live, and this is all going on. And it's incredible, what they do with one another. And by the way, this holds true, as you know, in academics as well as business. When you have professors or CEOs participate in collaborative environments, what happens? They're able to create more collaborative environments back in their companies and back in their classrooms. So I really advocate being part of a peer group for all of those reasons I talked about. I think it's incredibly valuable and powerful. And by the way, this isn't just reserved for CEOs. There are peer groups out there for CFOs and CMOs and director and manager levels. Like when you're in that part of the organization where you have a whole bunch of people, that you're managing up, down, and across and the whole thing, that's its own set of challenges, right? So to be among others that can help you navigate a lot of those things. Not to mention, by the way, just a final point, the world is changing. And this change, if we think it's happening at a fast rate now, hold on, buckle up, because it's going to get even more so. And the idea that any one of us would believe that we can just go about it and be by ourselves and kind of do this, I think we'd all benefit from having a little help.
I agree. And while I did find it interesting that you said folks in these groups that you work with are much more comfortable talking about the personal aspect than the business aspect, while that surprises me, I also know that when people are almost given the permission to take off their title and just show up as Anita or Leo and have that conversation and discover those shared experiences and create shared experiences through the conversation, it makes a world of difference in how they're able to then put those titles back on and show up the way they want to show up as leaders that are driving this particular change. So my question for you is, what is a common indicator that you have noticed working with peer groups that demonstrates that a shift has taken place for them?
It's a great question. First of all, one of the things I want to mention too is that the fact that when you have people in a room sharing at that level, whether in the room or in the Zoom or whatever happens to be, there's also an understanding that there is that what happens there stays there, that it's confidential.
Yes.
And that's a really important part of making people feel safe enough, knowing that when they leave that room, that's the end of that conversation. And, and that's where it stays. I think, so I've seen a lot of new groups, for example, who are trying to break through. They're trying to accelerate and advance the psychological safety of the room. And this happens in groups and teams. And, I think in addition to being committed to the purpose, like, why are we here? Like, let's recognize that we can't accomplish why we know we're here if we're not kind of playing all in. Okay. At least that's an understanding. Now I have to have the mindset where I'm going to try to challenge myself to look at this environment that I may not have anywhere else. And I think about this like people go to a spa and they show up at the spa and the steam is gently rising off the water and it's beautiful and they're looking at it and they go, wow. They know if they immerse themselves in that water, it'll be the most restorative experience in the whole world. They don't have one of these at home. And yet they'll stand there and look at it and they'll dangle their feet in the water or they'll sit next to it and read a magazine. And yet they don't take full advantage of the experience. So getting them to take full advantage of the experience is difficult, but not impossible. And it starts with those conversations, that curiosity, that intentional getting to know one another a lot better. It's also there's many other factors, but two important ones I think are modeling good sharing behaviors, right?
Mhm.
So if we're in a group together and I share a deep business or personal story with the group, and you see that there was not only no penalty for my doing that, but actually I and so many others around the table got real benefit from it, that at least sends you a message that, okay, that maybe I could do that too. Maybe when something comes up for me, I can speak out about it in that same way with the group. So it gives you that good modeling of sharing. But I think the other piece of it, if you think about that pool metaphor, is the people in the room who are listening. They are the pool of water. They create the safety. They have to listen and be present with the same level of gravity that kind of matches whatever topic is being brought up in the moment and what it means to the individual sharing it. And when that happens and you start getting that to happen repeatedly, and those examples start coming from one another, everything starts to change, including, by the way, one of the things about these 5 factors that we didn't show necessarily, but it's a reinforcing loop,
Mhm.
right? Right
Mhm.
people, psychological safety, productivity, accountability, leadership, and then it just drives that cycle
Yes, it
in a,
does.
in in a very big way. So this is where that psychological safety that many groups that have been together a while, they thought it was really great in year 2. Talk to them
Mhm.
in year 5. Talk to them in
Mhm.
year 8.
Yeah.
When for groups that have truly been together for a while, it's extraordinary what happens.
I absolutely love that whole visual of the spa and getting in and making sure that it's immersive, and you can't just get into your ankles until you need. You have to get in there. And similarly, sometimes when we go to the spa, there's that whole hesitancy of taking off your robe and having everybody see that you're not quite as tight as you used to be in one space, or that you've got this imperfection in another space, right? Everybody else is taking off their robe and everybody's got their issues. But if we get in the pool together, and if we're really intentional about, and you've heard this before, you only get out of it what you put into it, right? If we're really intentional about saying, hey, I'm here to learn about me, I'm here to explore me, and create that common experience and that shared understanding with other people that are here to do the same thing, then all that other stuff that doesn't matter about what you don't have right and what isn't in the right spot, where you might have a little more here and a little less there, it doesn't matter, because we're all about starting and meeting ourselves where we are. I always talk about meeting my client where they are. We have to meet ourselves where we are and love ourselves where we are. We have to start extending grace to ourselves through the learning process, which again goes back to absolutely denying yourself of falling into that shame and blame mindset and really leaning into the know and grow mindset. Wow, this is something that I've discovered about myself that I didn't know. I see that it might be getting in the way. And instead of beating myself up about that, I'm going to move forward and grow from it into the person that I intend to be, right?
You bet. Love it.
This has been an absolutely amazing conversation. Leo, where can people find out more about you and your work in peer innovation?
Please, yeah, connect with me on LinkedIn, Leo, Leobottary. You can also go to leobottary.com, where you can learn about peer innovation and what it can mean for your group, what it can mean for your team. I also run a peer innovation certification program for executive coaches, where that help them take their practice of coaching individuals and really expanding it to teams, with this foundational premise of looking at what high performing peer groups do so well, and how that can be transferred and translated. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. I love what I'm doing. I've never had more fun than I am right now, and that includes, of course, being part of this whole show. It's been great. I've enjoyed the conversation every bit as much as you have expressed, and then some, I'm sure. So thanks very much for having me.
Thank you so much, Leo. You were the perfect guest to help me kick off this iteration of real conversations with the C-suite. I so appreciate your insights. Community, again, you know the drill. If you want to hear this again or any of my previous podcasts, just go to my website, www.dranita.com. Remember to spell out the word doctor. And on the landing page in the top center, you'll see the button that says Keeping It Real Podcast. Go ahead and click there. Listen to this broadcast again or any of my previous broadcasts. Like, subscribe, and give me some feedback. I know that you had to enjoy this month's conversation as much as I did. So many wonderful nuggets. And if you can think of someone on your C-suite team or anyone else at that leadership level, please let me know. I would love to invite them onto the conversation, and let's hear some other perspectives. Until next time, this is Dr. Anita, thanking you for joining me and reminding you to stay blessed and keep it real.